So before we get into the nonsense today, look, these are just heel turns that meant something to me. So there are going to be other heel turns. You'll be like, I can't believe you didn't mention it, Simon. I know. I'm a waste of space, but thankfully what is not a waste of space is the YouTube comment section. That's not true at all. Different conversation for a different day. So anything that I miss off, we can talk about down there. Sound good? Yes, let's go. And you're going to freak out straight away, because in at number 10, I've just done it as a list, it's YouTube, you know, it's the best thing to do it, is Trish Stratus turns on Chris Jericho with Christian at WrestleMania 20. Now again, it comes to where I was at my life at the time and how I expected things to go and what I didn't expect. But I just remembered, like, if you go back and watch it now, it's kind of difficult television because all the flirting between Chris Jericho and Trish Stratus is a little bit like Saved by the Bell. But then again, I like my wrestling to be a bit goofy, so it's all good. But I remember watching this, and not in my wildest dreams did I ever think that Trish was going to slap Chris Jericho, totally screw him over, and then go to the top of the rampway and make out with Christian for a while. Now, I tried to watch as much of this as I possibly can, and my memory of it mostly is that we didn't go as far as we should have done with it. I would assume probably because Vince McMahon didn't like Christian. I don't want to get too distracted here, but man, did he undervalue that dude, as we've seen over the last few years. But there's also that one story out there that a plan that Vince had for Christian, because he didn't like his face, was when he would arrive and walk down the entrance ramp, he put a blue dot on his face to cover his face because he didn't like his face. Don't try and work it out. Don't try and figure out what that means. It's complete gibberish. It's complete 2 + 2 = potato. But when I was sort of going through my memory banks and trying to think of ones that made me go, oh my gosh, which is why you're going to absolutely love number 3. Number 3 is going to send everybody wild, but I don't care. It's totally true. When this one popped back up, I was like, oh yeah, that was really good. And I remember sat there on my couch, mouth agape. I mean, WrestleMania 20 is just crazy from top to bottom in many ways. But I thought it deserved a shout. And Trish Stratus was always really good. She was one of these people that could play both. Now, it's easier for her to play a heel these days because she's got the tenure and the legacy and she's like an all-timer. But even back then, she was able to tweak her character enough. In fact, that was the same with everybody in this. I mean, Chris Jericho had been doing that for years. After what's happened since he's been in AEW, Christian is probably a way better heel. But I remember times I loved Christian as a babyface, and Trish Stratus had that sort of 50-50 nature to her as well. So I just think it's one that deserves more credits. I understand, best heel turns of all time, but it was to me, because I remember it happened. I was like, my gosh, I've got to talk to my friends. If you get that kind of reaction, well, it's what this whole YouTube channel is basically predicated on. People just want to chat. As is this one, number 9, the debut of SmackDown. I always get confused about what the proper debut of SmackDown was, because they did a pilot, and then I think there was a break, and then they came back again. But anyway, it's when, given that it was the first one, we had a pay-per-view worthy match. It was The Rock taking on Triple H for the WWF title, with Shawn Michaels as a special guest referee. Now, this was during a period where Shawn Michaels kind of had one foot in and one foot out. We didn't know what he was going to do. Was he going to have to retire? And then he'd come back in 2002 and actually have the program with Triple H, which was kind of ironic. But probably is earmarked, and you can probably telegraph it from a mile away, and I should probably be ashamed of myself. But once again, I've got the memory ingrained into my head. I was in my parents' house. Obviously, I was a child. Where else was I going to be? I was sat on my bed. I had my tiny little TV that was about this big. It was a teeny tiny square. And when The Rock was going for the people's elbow, and then Shawn Michaels super kicked his head off, Triple H hits the pedigree as Jim Ross on commentary is like, oh my gosh, The Rock was about to win the WWF title. I lost my mind. And then, you know, Triple H and Shawn Michaels basically get back together. They basically reunite D-Generation X, which we hadn't seen for a while, especially not after, you know, Triple H had gone full-on mega heel. And it was just fun. And it was exciting. And I was still of that age where I was mad. I was really mad, which was difficult for me because, you know, Triple H was going to be my inspiration as soon as I could go to going for the gym. Whereas, you know, The Rock was the greatest person ever. And I, you know, was well aware of Shawn Michaels, and I was a Bret Hart guy. So there's always a bit of awe. Damn you, Shawn, especially when you're a child. But it just, if only there had been something like Reddit or social media or the internet. I mean, there were the dirt sheets, but I didn't know how to access them back in whenever the hell it was. So I just had to sit there with my feelings and wait for the television. And I think that's probably why when I look back on it now, retrospectively, it's so done just to pop a rating and get people talking. But I didn't know that at the time. I mean, this really does go into a conversation of the day, right? How we should just enjoy wrestling for what it is. Because that's what I did, you know, 20 or so years ago. And here we are talking about it. And it still means the world to me, even though it didn't last that long. The alliance between Shawn Michaels and Triple H didn't really go anywhere, and their next interaction was when they did the big feud and the unsanctioned match at SummerSlam, which is also very good. We've been distracted again, which is the theme of this channel, but for a different video I watched back on, you know, check that out again. it is a masterclass on both ends, especially because they know how worried people are going to be about Shawn Michaels back. Anyway, maybe this helps it. I don't know, but it's in my brain and I love it. And we go on to 2014. So we've made quite the jump, right? And it's down at NXT where we did our Evolution or whatever the hell the pay-per-view was called. And it's when Sami Zayn wins the NXT World title. Kevin Owens is there. He's only just turned up in the company and he just decks him. Now, I'm not going to lie. In 2014, I had become a super duper mega wrestling geek, wrestling nerd. And I was watching El Generico. I was watching Kevin Steen. I was trying to get into Ring of Honor. And Kevin Owens, we'll just call him now, otherwise I'll get confused, was somebody I was especially into. And there was certainly something to this too. I mean, I loved his work. I loved his character. I felt like he was just an all-rounder in many ways. But I remember listening to podcasts. Again, I was way back into all of this back then, and people say, oh, Kevin Steen is never going to make it to WWE. He's not their type of guy. He doesn't have the right look, blah, blah, blah. And that kind of made me like him more. I was like, what are you talking about? This guy has all the talent in the world. Why are you poo-pooing on him? Why are you raining on his parade? And then he found out, oh my gosh, they've signed him to NXT because Triple H had taken over, and he was essentially getting all the hot stars from the indie scene. So when they first brought him in, I presume he's going to be a babyface. It makes sense why they would have some kind of relationship between him and Sami Zayn because, we don't have to get into the nooks and crannies, but if you know, you know. And then for him to instantly go bad guy and instantly embrace being an asshole, which is pretty much what he did for the majority of his, not the majority, but the first half of his WWE career, it was just great. And you have to forgive me. This was less of a, oh my gosh, I didn't see it coming. More of a proper geek, oh, they were friends on the indie scene. And they've been brought up together. So I love the fact they get to continue this on the big stage, which is why I really do hope before all is said and done, they get to have one last super duper big match on a WrestleMania stage, hopefully for a world championship. Now, that's probably me. I don't know. It could happen. You never say never in wrestling. And they've both got however many years ahead of them they should, feel like they can do it. But I would just like that from a heritage point of view, which doesn't make any sense. But I think that's probably one of the earliest heel turns or latest heel turns, however you want to describe it, where I was just fully in, right? Wrestling was just throwing up over me. And obviously I was 2 years away from starting all the What Culture stuff too. Make sure you subscribe to them. Was it 2016? Yes, it was. So, the fact that it kind of all led me to that point, well, I'm always going to love it. Once again, we go super back in time for number 7, and it's Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty at the barbershop in 1991. Now, this was sort of just before I'd properly started watching wrestling, like a good few years before. But, so the first time I saw Shawn Michaels, he was the asshole heel already. But it almost made it worse. To learn after the fact, wait a minute, he was a part of a tag team that essentially changed how wrestling was viewed, and he threw his partner through some glass in a barber shop. I mean, it's just, there is so much nonsense to it. Now, the best thing you can do today is go and explain this to somebody who doesn't watch wrestling, because for starters, you have to tell them about Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Yes, right, a hairdresser who thought that would help his wrestling career, and then you have to tell them about how one dude threw his mate through a stained glass window, not a stained glass window, but a glass window in a fake barbershop as well. It's not a real barbershop, and it's just one of those things like, look, it's created a legacy. Is that the right word? I don't know now. But where when a tag team does break up, people get, they get branded. Who's going to be the Shawn Michaels and who's going to be the Marty Jannetty? I think that's massively unfair. Marty Jannetty could have been a Shawn Michaels, to use the terms. The only reason Marty Jannetty didn't is because he had a world of personal issues that you can still see very sadly happening today. And that meant he got fired from the company. He came back from the company. That's how you know how good he was. Even though he went through all this nut stuff, Vince McMahon and the WWF would keep giving him another chance, but it never really clicked, whereas Shawn Michaels obviously would go on to become one of the best wrestlers ever. But without this moment, does that happen? Arguably not, because it was a moment in time. It's become one of the legendary heel turns. And when you go back and watch it now, I mean, the fact he super kicks him through the damn thing as well, it just works, and it's well timed, and it makes sense if you do watch the shows leading up to that point too. And in many ways, it's a template or a model that everybody has used ever since. So what did the Rockers do? Oh, we'll try and do that, and we'll try and replicate that reaction again. You also get the shriek. That's when you know you've done a good heel turn, because you hear, in the audience. That's when a wrestler can look around and go, man, I did a good job. Number 6 continues my nerdom too, and retroactively going back to great angles, but it's the Mega Powers in 1988 or 1989. However you do want to kind of spin it. I mean, it's mostly 88, I suppose. That's the crutch of the story. But this was also introducing me to brand new wrestling from a WWF point of view, /E, I want to make it clear. Because, two good guys going at it, and not only two good guys, but Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man Randy Savage, who were A and B when it came to sort of like, the hierarchy hierarchy of people at the top of the card. So when all of a sudden they're teaming, it's the greatest thing ever. You're like, man, it's like Christmas come early. It's like Christmas and Hanukkah pushed together, but then it's quite nuanced for wrestling. I love that word on these videos. But Hulk Hogan is kind of taking Randy Savage's spotlight, even though he doesn't mean to. And then Miss Elizabeth gets caught up in that. Then all of a sudden Randy just loses his mind. He goes super jealous, James, and he thinks, was it lust in my, you got lust in your eyes, Hulk Hogan. I mean, if you're dropping lines like that, I'm always going to love it. But it also builds for a year until we get to WrestleMania 5. And I can't stand it. People go, oh, the match wasn't very good. What did you expect from the Macho Man and Hulk Hogan? In terms of what I expected from that match, it's brilliant. It's excellent. It does everything that I want it to do, other than the fact that I think Macho Man should have won it. But again, the WWF was a very different company back then. But it would have helped Randy Savage more, but that's a political conversation. But once more, when I remember buying I'm still quite old. I remember buying the VHSs, and eventually I got around to WrestleMania 5 and I caught up with everything, which was quite hard back then, obviously. And it's just such a well-told story. And it's one today that if you were going to do a good guy versus good guy match, I mean, look, it's not the same, and people are going to go nuts, but it had the same vibe to me in the way that we approached it. I watched Collision this morning, and I watched the Will Ospreay and Swerve Strickland weigh-in. And the way they are treating it is the same kind of thing. They take everything seriously. There's no gaga here. And of course, there was lots of stupid stuff with Hogan and Macho Man because they were over-the-top characters. But when we got back to the emotional side, there was no nonsense. Randy Savage really felt this way. Hulk Hogan was genuinely offended that he would ever think this. And poor Miss Elizabeth's like, what am I going to do here? I'm caught up in the middle of these two. And Will Ospreay and Swerve have done similar things. And it's the same with the Bloodline too. Like, the Paul Heyman and the Solo Sikoa stuff, they treat it like it matters. And look, I'm sure there'll be, there's the Bruno Sammartino and Larry Zbyszko angle from way before then. Was that the 70s when Zbyszko turns on Bruno because he feels like he's got like a mentor complex, really, or a trainer complex. They took that seriously as well. So I'm not saying the mega powers were the first one to do it, but in my stupid wrestling life, it's certainly one of the early ones. And I love comedy wrestling, goofy wrestling for life, but when you're trying to get a certain amount of motion across, then yeah, you do have to go serious with it. And that's what they did, which is kind of the same for what's next. I mean, the problem is you have to try and get rid of hindsight and the fact that it didn't work on the evening either. But I don't have to care about the fans in the auditorium. I only care about myself watching from home, and it's Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 17. Because if you just watch that in isolation, I don't think you would know that Steve Austin has just turned bad guy. Because we're in Texas. We're like down the road from where Steve Austin grew up. So, he beats The Rock with a chair. He has help from McMahon. They shake hands afterwards. What's everybody doing? Yeah, Steve Austin won the world title. It doesn't really translate at all. Or if it did, the people there on that night decided, screw this. We're not missing, we're not missing the grand party of Steve Austin being the champion again. And then you get the heel character afterwards, which I've always been a big fan of. I think it actually showed that Stone Cold had incredible range. He could be funny, he could be crazy, he could be into hugs. Again, we were just talking about it from my point of view, watching it on my television screen on pay-per-view. I was taking it in the way that it was meant to, but I had Jim Ross and I had, was it Jerry Lawler or Paul Heyman then? I think it was Paul Heyman. But I had them, painting me the picture. Not that I needed it. And it was a bad idea. Again, as much as I like what we did with Steve Austin afterwards from an entertainment point of view, it would be like, I don't know, Batman and the Joker being buddies. Now, yes, I know there's comic threads where we do that, but that doesn't work for me either. Sometimes I want them to be forever enemies. And it was just impossible to believe that Austin would, get rid of 3-4 years, whatever it was, not even that long really, about 2.5 years of animosity and evilness and trying to kill each other and just go, well, I want to be the world champion again. And they did set it up excellently in those promos they did beforehand when you have The Rock and Austin doing the back and forth with Jim Ross. But at the same time, I just think you could believe more that Austin would have found another way. Again, we're getting in too much the nitty gritty here. But if we're talking about heel turns that hit home and have you afterwards, again, just wanted to call people up and have a bit of a chat, you can do it. And I went and found some super, super early message boards. People are so mad. They're so mad. You get half where you're like, oh man, it's so boring. I can't believe we've done this. And other people going, Steve Austin and McMahon together. It's the same. Wrestling hasn't changed at all. People like to pretend that it's worse these days. It's not worse. It's just more ways to get your mouth out there because we have social media. But yeah, executed, not great. After the fact, not great. But just seeing that site it will remain with me for the rest of my life. Because again, I was the most impressionable at that age. Do you know what I mean? Coming into your teenage years. I loved Stone Cold Steve Austin. like I loved him. And I guess I felt betrayed. So in that sense, I shouldn't really complain about it. They did their job. But sadly, I've got my adult brain on now, and it weren't great. Number 4 was, though, and number 4 will always be good, is Seth Rollins turning on the Shield in 2014. I went back, the reason this got in here too is I went back and watched the Wyatt match at the Elimination Chamber or Extreme Rules, the amazing 6-man tag that they had where they lose. And the kind of story of that match is Seth Rollins trying to be the glue that holds the Shield together, but he can't do it. And he gets a bit frustrated, like, man, we're not working as a team here. And then that ties into the fact why he decides, screw it, I'm going to join up with the Authority, because he felt like if he wanted to be a success, he had to head in a different direction, which is not too dissimilar to, what's his real name? Colby Lopez, I believe. When you go back and watch interviews when he was Tyler Black or Ring of Honor, or when he was in the NXT system, that's how he felt about it. So it's just great that he almost took his real life, I must get to the top, and I must be the champion, I must be the best ever. And as soon as this vehicle that he'd been brought into the main roster on felt like it was careening off the rails, he's like, screw it, I'm going to go with those guys instead. But I also think, and it was the argument at the time, I remember this vividly, how I don't know, the podcast and just the wider conversation, it's too soon. You know, there was more, I think people were pushing them to have a prolonged face run for the merchandise and making money, and there's probably some truth in it. But when they did it, it was so unexpected. I think that's why people talk about it today, and you can't argue that it didn't work. They were brought in to be pillars of this industry. Roman Reigns is the #1 super duper whooper guy in WWE. Seth Rollins is right beneath him or on par with him. You can make that argument, but I know that Raw's a better show when he's on it. He has all the star power in the world. And Jon Moxley, I was listening to a Tony Khan interview today or yesterday on Wrestling Observer Radio, and he called Jon Moxley the biggest star that AEW has ever had. And I thought about it, I was like, can't argue it. So he's gone on to do good stuff too. And I would imagine that a lot of people watching this, it's probably one of the earliest heel turns that you were into, depending on when you started to watch the product, of course. But it's great, and it's so well done. And the fact that Roman Reigns sells it like he's been shot with a gun, and the fact that we were still tying into this come WrestleMania 40, where Roman swung at Seth Rollins, as opposed to take out Cody Rhodes, that's good storytelling. And that's relying on your own confidence in what you have done in the past, and that people will remember to tie it into your modern day programming. And we do remember. And the reason we remembered is because it had emotion behind it. There's that stupid word again. If you're getting annoyed at me, don't worry, it's every day. When we get to number 3, even looking at it now makes me laugh. The funniest one on this list. But I got so many stories about this. I'll tell them all. It's Ahmed Johnson joins the Nation of Domination, June 1997. Now, I'm not even sure this was even explained. I remember Ahmed cut a promo and just shouted, go, man, I don't get any respect. But after the Nation of Domination have beat Ahmed Johnson and The Undertaker, Ahmed goes to pick up The Undertaker, and it's so obvious he's going to turn heel. I rewatched it. He gives him the Pearl River plunge, and he walks up the aisleway, and he does the Nation of Domination salute. But again, I remember watching this in my parents' living room. I was so damn young. I watched whatever the Live Wire, whatever the Flip the Sunday morning show was called in the UK. It used to air on Sky, well, no, whatever it was, I can't remember. But you knew it was nothing but highlights, and you knew it was nothing but running you through what happened in the week, and I watched it just in case they told me why Ahmed Johnson turned heel. I watched every one of those programs, and it used to air on Friday nights Raw in England, because we had a 5-day delay for whatever reason. It was excruciating. I had to go through the weekend, I had to go through a whole week of school, and then I got some crappy explanation from Ahmed Johnson. But my other cool story is, maybe a couple of years ago, whenever it was, I was on Squared Circle on Reddit, and somebody had put, either as a comment or an actual thread, I can't remember, that they're still not over it. And Ahmed Johnson it was still one of the most surprising heel turns ever. I don't really ever comment on there or anything, but I feel like I had an affinity with this person. I wanted to go, dude, you and me both. And that's why I'd always put it in there. I've said it on other videos before. I don't know why I liked Ahmed Johnson so much. I don't know why I'm so offended that he joined the Nation. And let's not forget, this was such a bust. This is June 1997, and by August, The Rock has come back, and he's joined the Nation, and Ahmed Johnson is nowhere to be seen. So he didn't do anything with it. And I would imagine, probably, I'm guessing here, I don't want to put too much, gasoline on the dude, but I would imagine a lot of it was Vince Russo will do a turn for the sake of a turn. I don't know. Again, I don't want to say. But either way, it worked with me, because here we are a lot of years later. It still makes me mad. And Ahmed Johnson ain't ever coming back to wrestling now, so I'm never going to know. Number 2 is a different one, but given what it did give birth to over the next few years, which we're still experiencing now, and also it ended a terrible experiment that should have ended years earlier, I'm going to put Roman Reigns in 2020, when, of course, that camera panned back, and who was he sat next to? Paul flippin' Heyman. I mean, it seems so obvious now because they work so well together. And again, you'll be able to remember this. It wasn't that long ago. I remember I was at my girlfriend's sister's place. I was doing one of my SmackDowns when I'm on the road, so they'd all gone out and I was watching it on a laptop in the lounge, I presume. And I remember I got that goosebump feeling when the camera panned out. I mean, I've labeled these 10 to 1. I don't necessarily think they have the equivalent of worst to best or anything like that. But in terms of the modern wrestling, I really do think this made people go, wait a minute, what? We're going all in with this. Because, of course, from 2016 to 2020, you could argue 2015 too, it had been Roman is the babyface, Roman is the new John Cena, Roman is the new Hulk Hogan. It didn't translate. It didn't compute because that's not who this guy was. And as we have learned after the fact, Roman knew this too. He didn't want to say stupid suffering succotash, but he didn't have the equity I suppose he has backstage now, so he couldn't say anything. So he just had to go with it, as you would do if your boss tells you to do something. So when people go, if you're an actor and Steven Spielberg says, throw yourself down the stairs, you go, no, Steve. He'll go, okay, you're off my set, you absolute goober, and don't come back. And it's the same with Roman Reigns. But he understood the kind of person he wanted to be. I suppose this is there wasn't many, but it's a small positive of the pandemic era. When he did finally come back to television, he probably said, I'll come back, but you've got to make me a bad guy. Ipso facto, he turns into the tribal chief. He gets Paul Heyman to really underline. They're so smart when you look back on it, to tell you this isn't just being done for shibs and giggles. We're not doing this as a gimmick. It's not a novelty. We're going all in with this. And here we are in 2024, and Roman is about to come back to TV and be the babyface that WWE always wanted him to be. Now, actually, we can hit pause here and go to number one, because it's the same story. Number one is The Rock in 1998 at the Survivor Series. How we haven't learned. It was happening before The Rock too, but why we needed to wait for The Rock. The Rock came back and joined the nation, because before that, you know the deal, die, Rocky sucks, right? Thankfully, he hurt his knee. I don't mean thankfully, but it got him off TV. And that was a good thing, because I think they would have driven this one into the ground as well. But when he did come back, it was like, we've got to do something new. This is an absolute farce. He goes heel, becomes one of the biggest stars ever. Surprise, surprise, we do the same thing with Roman Reigns. So who's the next big thing? Let's go with Bron Breakker. I mean, it's kind of different with Bron because people love him anyway. But let's say we did bring him up as a good guy and everyone was booing him. I really hope these days we just go, that's it, heel. Heel straight away, we figure out the story and we start heading that direction, because we don't need to do any of this banging people on the heads with it anymore. And, we mentioned Vince Russo. This was a Vince Russo idea because it is a mega swerve. But it was just so smart because, on the Raw or the SmackDown beforehand, no, SmackDown didn't exist then. On the Raw beforehand, you had The Rock dropping people's elbows on the corporation. So going into the Deadly Game tournament with its own song, sung by Jim Johnston, I believe. I assume he played the guitar. You didn't think. I thought The Rock was going to win, but I didn't think The Rock was going to end being the biggest heel in the company and teaming up with Vince and Shane McMahon. And the fact that throughout it, they screw Steve Austin, they screw Mankind, they probably screw somebody else that I can't think about right now, it sort of does make sense. There's also a lot of plot holes in it when you really think about it. He didn't need to drop the elbows on Vince and Shane McMahon. It made no difference. Well, not Shane, because Shane was on the good side. He then turned during the Deadly Game tournament as well. But either way, it left such an impression on me. I remember being baffled by this. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe The Rock would do this, because he had already gone good guy by, that must have been November 1998, so towards the end of 98. He was well established as a babyface by then. I think everybody had realized, well, this is our dude. And then somebody smartly backstage went, well, listen, it's great that Vince and Steve are going to be having this feud, but Vince, you can't wrestle. You're terrible. So we need someone to get in there. And not only did they find somebody in The Rock, which allowed all of that to become 10 times as good, but he could talk, surprise, surprise, and he was a damn good wrestler as well. So I think that it achieved so much. I don't want to say that we hadn't have done this and we hadn't pegged The Rock against Stone Cold, that it wouldn't have got to the heights that it did do. But you have to have the bad guy to beat, and The Rock was so damn good at it. And it's a shame. There's no point watching that pay-per-view now. It's quite boring, not boring, but there is a lot of gaga, a lot of shenanigans in it. The reason it felt so good in hindsight is because you did get the big, oh my gosh, at the end of it. So it felt like a movie. It almost felt like a whodunit, but hey-ho, that's of its time. But I think even though I've done this on a personal level, I still think if I started talking on a more objective one, I think I would put that one up there as well. In terms of WWF, maybe there's some other ones I am not thinking about. There are certainly ones with more heat, as they say. Again, we mentioned Larry Zbyszko. I watched that the other day. That's violent. And when you take it out in terms of all of wrestling, there will be others. But no, I feel quite happy putting that one at number one. But the most important thing now is, again, definitely Mr. Low. Drop those in the comments below. And otherwise, just, comment. That's what it's called, so you may as well do it. Also, like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Click the bell, ding, ding. Notification crew. There is a video on the screen right there. Me doing another one on my tiered list, so check that out too. Otherwise, it is GorillaMind.com/Simon. You just go to Simon, get 10% off. These are fitness supplements I use. I get back to the gym tomorrow, thank goodness. So, I've been using them anyway, but I'll double use them. It's not true. I'm going to use them in the same way. Otherwise, it's patreon.com/Simon316. Simon316 on all social media. Simon J. Miller on TikTok, where I have done started doing dumb 60 seconds wrestling trope videos. I don't know. That's how I get my kicks these days. I'm an old stupid man. Simon Miller on Cameo. If you want a personalized video message, it would be my treat, and otherwise it is Pro Wrestling Tees with my name and Samson Athletics with my name if you would like a t-shirt. I always appreciate that. Have a good day, friends. See you soon.